Phil, take care. Thanks.
Well, recent polling shows the race for the president is getting tighter, including polls from the New York Times, CBS News, Quinnipiac, Washington Post, ABC News, AP, GFK, Rasmussen Report. You got all those? All of them are showing a closer race. Now, one new survey conducted for the group Public Notice shows the president ahead 47% to Governor Romney's 46%. But that same poll shows voters are concerned about taming the national debt. And more of those polls think Governor Romney has a plan to lower that debt compared to the president. Now, the latest polling average at Real Clear Politics shows President Obama with a slight advantage. He's ahead of Mitt Romney by just over 1 point there. Joining us now are some folks who can tell us a lot about the numbers, what they mean as well. Bernard Whitman was a pollster for President Clinton. He's the author of 52 Reasons to Vote for Obama. David Winston is a Republican pollster and a former advisor to the House Republican Conference. And independent pollster Scott Rasmussen is also with us. He's president of RasmussenReports.com. Welcome to you all. Nice to have you with us.
Good to be here. Great to meet you, John.
We have a lot of great viewer questions because we do talk a lot about these polling numbers, and the questions of why are they that way is what our viewers really want to know. A great question, David, from one of our viewers, Scott Jones. He wants to know, is 2012 shaping up to be another Reagan 1980? We hear all those comparisons all the time, where Reagan was at the polls right now compared to Carter. Do you see a similar pattern in this election?
I think there's certainly an opportunity for that. I mean, when you take a look at this has been sort of an even race. You're looking at a sitting president who the economy's gone just atrociously for. The challenge to Governor Romney at this point is to provide that alternative. And I think the selection of Ryan clearly indicates that he wants to make that alternative. And make that and lay that out, and that's the challenge. If he can do that, which is what Reagan did with Carter back in 1980, there is the possibility for having that sort of outcome.
Bernard, what do you think about that comparison when it comes to the numbers, not necessarily the policy? What do you think the numbers are showing us? Is it similar to Reagan 1980?
I think it's actually a lot more similar to the 2004 election of George Bush and John Kerry. You have in Mitt Romney sort of a patrician Massachusetts politician that people don't really know, who's being defined by the other side. And you have a sitting president who the voters are generally comfortable with, but they have some concerns with. In 2004, George Bush's issue was Iraq. This year, with Barack Obama, we have the economy. But at the end of the day, the American people, I think, are going to look at both these guys, see that there is a clear choice between the two, and decide the man at the helm, while he has not yet fully delivered on all of his promises, they're more comfortable with, and they feel better about, and they know him better, and ultimately I think he will be reelected with a narrow margin.
You know, Scott, I'm going to take you back into history too and test some of your historical perspective here, if you don't mind, when we talk about Reagan. You know, the voting bloc that was very important for Reagan. What was that voting bloc in 1980, and is that a similar voting bloc for Republicans this year?
Well, you know, they called them Reagan Democrats. They were the conservative Democrats. This year it's white working class Democrats or white working class former Democrats. A key group. They're very heavily concentrated in places like Pennsylvania, throughout the Midwest, over to Wisconsin. And yes, they are sensitive to the economy. They are very similar to a group from 30 years ago. But I've got to tell you, I know that politicians and pollsters like to compare this election to earlier ones and find these patterns that fit. The reality is, in 1980, we didn't even have talk radio coming into its own. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have Twitter. They didn't spend as much money early on. This campaign is taking us into a new era, and nobody quite knows what's going to happen. Bernard and David would both tell you they don't really know who's going to win. They know who they're rooting for, and they can make a scenario that shows it's breaking for either candidate.
No Twitter, Scott. I mean, we wouldn't even be able to do an experiment. No, talk radio. Well, things have changed dramatically, and that is certainly true. I mean, that is a fact that we can all agree on. Real quick here, Bernard, and then we're going to take a quick break, and I have more questions for you. We have a new poll from Ohio. The Columbus Dispatch is out, 45 to 45 in that bellwether state. You know, what do you make of what's going on in Ohio?
You know, I think Ohio is a mirror of the nation. The country is very much split down the middle, and ultimately, this election, while a national conversation, is really a battle at around 40 or 50 key counties, and a number of them are in Ohio. So we're going to see most of the election play out in these key districts, and ultimately I think whoever wins Ohio is very likely to be the next president. I have a belief that the Ryan pick ultimately will hurt Romney in Florida, and if he loses Florida, he's got to win Ohio. So to have a split electorate like that a few months out is dangerous for the Republican nominee.
David, a real quick question here. Gabby has a question about Mitt Romney. She says a lot of folks are saying that he's polling as unlikable. And she wants to know, who are the people that think he's unlikable? Is it Democrats, or are there Republicans that believe he's just not a likable person?
No, I think that's probably Democrats, but I want to get to something broader here. I mean, this is an election where you've got the electorate who's very dissatisfied about the direction of the country, and I think the new sort of undecided voter is this group of people who are saying, I'm really unhappy with this president, what's my alternative, and how those folks break. And I would suggest that reaches across the country. That's just not simply Ohio and Florida, but that's where you see it the most. But I mean, as people sitting around their kitchen tables trying to figure out how they're going to purchase groceries, that's how they're going to decide who they're going to vote for, and they're looking for the best policy, not necessarily the person they like the best.
All right, David, Bernard, and Scott stand by. We have a great question from Scott, who wants to know which voting groups are the most important for the Republicans for this convention, and what do the Republicans need to do. We're going to have you all back to answer a few more viewer questions with us, so stand by. Thank you very much.
But in the meantime, the Republicans have a little tropical storm or maybe a hurricane to deal with as their convention gets underway. Isaac is bearing down on South Florida. We're waiting for a news conference from the National Hurricane Center. It is scheduled about 20 minutes from now. When it happens, we'll have it for you live.